writing something that's so raw and honest and vulnerable can be very cathartic. And it's great when you're writing it because the stories just came very easy. And I wrote freely. It wasn't until I published the book that I was like, oh boy, people are going to read this. I don't know about this. And the first people to read this were my parents. And I knew that they were going to be reading things about me that they didn't know because I wrote about stories that were very private to me, things that I felt like I would keep private forever. I talk a lot about relationships in this book, and I felt like I couldn't give advice about relationships unless I took the reader through some of my own. And so there's a chapter called He Loves Me Not. And the song that I would listen to a lot is a song by Pink. And the song is called I Don't Believe You. It's haunting and it's beautiful, and it's a song about a woman who's saying, when you say you don't love me anymore, I just don't believe you. And I think that can happen a lot in relationships. We don't want to believe when someone says, I don't want you anymore. And so that was a song I listened to over and over again when I was writing this chapter. And while I wrote about different relationships, some good, some bad, there was a difficult one that was really hard to write about. And I knew it was going to be especially painful because I was worried about what my parents would think when they read it. I definitely was worried what my parents would think when they read this. I'm going to read an excerpt from the book of this experience from a very unhealthy relationship that I was in. I'm not sure how the next chain of events started, but it felt like an out-of-body experience for me. Ken went from silence to rage. One moment we were sitting next to each other on the couch in silence, and the next thing I knew, we were doing a violent dance from room to room. This is my recollection of how the next several minutes unfolded. His hands were clenched around my arms, and his fingers were digging into me. At one point, he pressed his fist into my throat. He was pushing me up against the wall, then onto the bed and back up against the wall with force. I was screaming and crying. He was violent. I remember thinking to myself as this moment was unfolding, what if the neighbors hear? My mom and dad never did this. I wasn't raised to end up in an abusive relationship. I'm screaming and crying, and he's hurting me. I feel like a piece of trash. I'm so embarrassed that this is happening to me. I hate him, but I don't want him to leave me. How is this happening to me? And then there was silence. I was pinned up against the front door. We both looked down at the white t-shirt I was wearing. It had blood on it. And I remember him saying to me, "That's your fault. You did that." With tears in my eyes, blood on my shirt, and scrapes on my arm, I reminded him that I had a friend coming over for a cookout. Ken told me to change my shirt and clean up. I did what he told me to do. Moments later, my friend arrived, and together, Ken and I smiled, laughed, entertained my friend, and acted as if nothing just happened. I stayed in that relationship for another year, and I never told my family about what happened that day. It was a secret I planned to keep until now. And so when I look back and I read that, I think, who was that girl? Because I know who I am today, and the person I am today would never have let something like that happen to them. And I think in life sometimes we find ourselves in those situations, not necessarily that situation in particular, but more those moments when we step outside of ourselves and we watch the scene unfold and say, I never thought that would happen to me. I never thought that would be me. That's not me. That couldn't be me. And if we can take the step back and learn from an experience like that, and learn that you never want to be in an unhealthy relationship. You should never allow anyone toxic to be in your life. But sometimes we do. And so you have to have that moment of recognizing it and having clarity to know that it's not good for you. And that sometimes we let people into our lives. And eventually, as a good friend of mine said to me once, it's okay to say to somebody, there's no room for you in my theater anymore.